and welcome to the GSMC Book Review Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Entertainment Network. I am your host, Sarah. We have a great show for you today, an author interview with returning author Carter Wilson. We'll be talking about his newest thriller, The Father She Went The Father She Went to Find. Goodness, this show's starting off well now, isn't it? As we get started, I do want to remind you to like and follow the show, subscribe on whatever platform you are either watching or listening to the show on. That really does help. Also, if you want to support the show in a slightly different way, you can go to gsmcpodcast.info, and there you can leave a tip or a donation. If you'd also like to leave a question or a comment with that tip or donation, I would love to interact with those questions or comments. I will read them on the next episode following the next episode after receiving those. So if you go to gsmcpodcast.info, that is another way to support not only this show but the entire network by leaving a tip or a donation. I hope you are having a good start to your week. It's Tuesday, of course, so hopefully you did something relaxing or fun or whatever you needed over the weekend. Ours was nice. We've been, of course, having great weather. We spent some time in the pool over the weekend, met some of our neighbors that we had not previously met. They own a place here, but they come over several times a year, so they're not always here, and we just hadn't met them before. So we got to meet them, which was nice. Did not go for a walk. We took our usual weekend break from walks, but kind of made up for it with a vengeance yesterday because we went for an 11-mile walk. We did our normal walk in the morning, which is about 6 miles, 6.2 because it's a 10K, and then we dropped the dogs off at home so they could sleep, and we went to a couple of grocery stores to do some shopping and came back, and that added another whatever it was. It was 10.98 miles. So yeah, I rounded up to 11, but that was a little bit crazy, but it was good. It was good. And so yeah, we're back off to walking this week. But at any rate, we're not here to talk about my walks. We're here to welcome back Carter Wilson. This is his third time on the episode or on the podcast, so I am happy to have him back. He writes standalone thrillers. The one that we are talking about today is called The Father She Went to Find. Let me give you the description of this book. A road trip to find closure, or a reckless chase that could turn deadly. Penny has never met anyone smarter than her. That's par for the course when you're a savant, one of less than 100 in the world. But despite her photographic memory and superpowered intellect, there's one mystery Penny has never been able to solve. Why did her father leave when she was in a coma at age 7, and where is he now? On Penny's 21st birthday, she receives a card in the mail from him, just as she has every year since he left. But this birthday card is different. For the first time ever, there's a return address and a goodbye. Penny doesn't know the world beyond her mother's house and the special school she's attended since her unusual abilities revealed themselves. But the mystery of her father's disappearance becomes her new obsession. For the first time ever, she decides to leave home, to break free of everything that has kept her safe, and use her gifts to answer the questions that have always eluded her. What Penny doesn't realize is she might not be able to outsmart a world far more complicated and dangerous than she'd ever imagined. And so again, that is the description of The Father She Went to Find by Carter Wilson. And this is, as I said, a standalone thriller. So if you're looking for a read that is not, it's not a part of a series, you might want to check this out. Of course, if you are looking for thrillers, he is always good for that. You know me, I'm kind of wimpy when it comes to a lot of violence or really, really super scary thrillers. So he definitely does not go that far. There is, of course, some violence, but it's nothing hugely gratuitous or descriptive or gory. I appreciate that. And I really like Penny as a character. She's very different from other characters that I have read. This book takes place in 1987. So, of course, lack of cell phones and GPS and those types of technology play into the storyline, but also just revisiting 1987 was kind of fun. There is a scene in a mall where she's walking by Walden Books and JCPenney and the arcade, they're talking about the arcades. There's a mention of a Spencer's and just, stuff from my teenage years. We talk a little bit about this in the interview. So kind of fun. I was, let's see, 1987. I would have started seventh grade in the fall of 1987. So finishing sixth, starting seventh, middle school. Ooh, yeah, actually, I don't want to go back to 1987. Middle school was super, super awkward for me, but it was fun to kind of think about the nostalgia of the 80s. At any rate, I really, as I said, enjoyed Penny as a character. She is accompanied by two people who become friends, but who are very random in terms of her association with them. She does not know them at the beginning, but they get involved, Travis and Fia, and they both have some interesting elements and add some interesting points to that plot as well. So, again, the book is called The Father She Went to Find. The author is Carter Wilson. Let's go ahead and turn now to that interview with Carter. Hi, Carter. Welcome back to the podcast.
Glad to be here as always.
I'm glad to have you here. And you've been on, this is your third time. This is the first time that that we've actually been looking at each other. So thank you for doing video for this one.
Yeah,
It's
of course.
newish for me still, so I'm getting used to that. But as we get started, we're going to talk about your newest book, The Father She Went to Find. But as per usual, if you wouldn't mind just reintroducing yourself, sharing a little bit with my viewers and listeners.
Yep, sure. I'm Carter Wilson. I'm the USA Today bestselling author of 9 standalone thrillers. So I've been writing for about, 21 years now.
Oh, wow.
Kind of started out of nowhere. I had no aspirations to be a writer, and it just kind of started one day, and I haven't looked back. And I've learned a lot through rejection and failure and struggle and self-teaching, and I've had a pretty good run. And now I launched my own writing company, Unbound Writer, and to kind of share some of the experiences I've learned over the last 20 years and through coaching and retreats and online classes.
No, that's wonderful. Great. Thank you so much. So this one's number 9. Is that what you said?
Yep, number
9.
9, and then number 10 comes out in January.
Okay. So this one is called The Father She Went to Find. If you could give a quick overview.
Yeah, Father She Went to Find. All my books are standalone novels. There's no series, so this, I'm always excited to figure out who I'm going to write about and what kind of situation they're in. And in this case, it follows the journey of a 21-year-old woman, Penny Bly, and this takes place in 1987. And what's special about Penny Bly is she's a savant. She became a savant through physical trauma when she was 6 or 7 years old, which is a very rare thing, but it's a thing. And so she has these exceptional mental capabilities. But her father actually left the family when she was in a coma at that age after the fall. And he sends her a birthday card every year, and that's the only contact she has from him. So now she's 21 and she receives a card from him that essentially says, "This is the last time I'm ever going to write to you." So Penny takes it upon herself to just leave everything she's ever known. She's never traveled outside of her hometown in Eau Claire, Wisconsin, in a bid to find her father, to get answers. So it's a bit of a journey, and it kind of tells the story about what happens when one of the smartest people in the world has no street smarts, and they find themselves out, in the proverbial wilderness, and has to deal with all the things waiting for her out there.
I was laughing a little bit when the 21st birthday card came with that very terse message that sets off the whole story. My middle niece is turning 21 in July, and I was like, I'm not going to, but I was like, oh, I'm going to write you this note. No, don't disown someone in a birthday card, or just cut off contact with them. What was your initial inspiration for this particular story?
Yeah, and I'm sure you've talked to a million authors, and inspiration is always a fluid and intangible and differing thing. And for me, I usually start thinking of something about halfway through writing whatever current book that I'm writing. And I never have an idea for the full story. I don't outline, so I never know where it's going to go. But this character of Penny just kind of kept coming to me every day. I kept thinking about it. All I knew is I knew her age. I knew in my mind what she looked like. I knew it was 1987, and I knew she was a savant. That's all I knew. And I kind of told myself, I'm like, if I 3 or 4 months from now, when I finish the book I'm working on, I'm still thinking about this person. I'm going to write about her and figure out what her story is. So I don't write anything down. I don't take any notes. I just think. And so, yeah, sure enough, I finished that book, and then I'm like, all right, what's the deal with this person? And I just started writing to try to figure out who she was.
Yeah, and we've talked about that before, that you're a pantser, not a plotter, and you
Yeah.
don't really do character sketches either, right? That you just kind of develop them as you write. Is that
Right. Exactly. And they tend to change. So there's a lot of editing. But I will say the other inspiration was I wrote this I probably started writing this in mid 2020. So this was my pandemic book. And I don't know if you've had this experience talking to other authors, but I certainly have, where an author's book that they wrote during the pandemic, especially, fiction, might look differently than what some of their other works were. And I remember specifically having this thought as this woman, Penny, started coming to my mind, that I wanted it to be set back in time. I personally wanted to travel back to a time that was good for me, was happy, was, safe. I was 17 years old in 1987, so of course I had very fond memories. So it was kind of almost a shield for me, a nostalgia trip. But you go back into whatever that time is, and you realize there are no good old days.
right?
As much as my fun memories are, you start poking around the 80s, you're like, this was a pretty brutal decade. There was a lot of bad things that happened in the 80s, which is great for a thriller writer. So worked out
Right.
well.
So yeah, lots of nostalgia for the 80s, and but it's interesting what we remember about the 80s, what we're nostalgic for in the 80s, how the 80s are portrayed, and does that feel like it actually was? Not always. They are always portrayed like kind of bright, crazy colors, and the 80s were very brown in many ways. But yeah, a lot of stuff happened in the 80s that it was not great. I mean, every decade's going to have a lot that happens. So, nostalgia, it definitely gives us different memories, different visions of what happened during certain time periods, right? But let's go ahead and take our first break of this episode. When we come back, we'll be talking about the mall. So stay tuned. You are listening to and are watching the GSMC Book Review podcast, and I will be right back.
Mm-hmm. 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 Let's go. I wake up to a little bit of drool on my pillow, feel like it's gonna be a bad day. Yeah, I'm tired of shit, and the coffee ain't hit yet, damn, ain't that great. I don't wanna go to work, cause my boss is a jerk, and I'm not even that paid. I need a change in my life, cause I don't feel alive, and there's nothing that makes me happy. Hold my beer for a minute, I'm about to quit my job, cash in for a ticket. I'm going on a trip and I don't plan to visit. I'm gonna stay there till I feel like I'm winning, and this is just the beginning. I need a big change, help me feel like living. I need a big swing, home runs I'm hitting, and I'll never look back, moving on till I get it all. And we all got dreams, we all want things, but what you gonna do for it? How you gonna move for it? What you gonna be? And do you believe you can do anything?
Welcome back to the GSMC Book Review podcast and my conversation with Carter Wilson. As we go into this segment, I do want to remind you that if you want to support the show in a different way, you can go to gsmcpodcast.info and leave a tip or a donation. Again, that's gsmcpodcast.info. That helps not only the show, but also the entire network. And thank you, as always, for all the support you give in whatever form that support takes. As we come back, we were talking about the 80s, and there's a lot of nostalgia for the 80s, of course. There's a lot of nostalgia for different decades, for different people. And Carter was saying that there was a lot of bad stuff that happened in the 80s too, but that it's really good fodder for a thriller writer. It got me to thinking that Thea, one of the characters in the book, is from Nicaragua, and there's a conversation about some of the events that were going on in Nicaragua, in the 80s. And he really brings it home with a character from there who experienced those that I just saw on the television, brought back some of that coverage, and that there was a lot of stuff that happened in the 80s. But as a kid, I didn't always understand everything that was going on. Like I said, I was in middle school, so having a character that is from that country puts a human face to it. That's always good. That's one of the reasons, as I've said a million times, that I like historical fiction, putting some more human aspects to events that we sometimes only read about in textbooks, or in this case, I saw on the news growing up, didn't always understand what I was seeing or reading. But anyway, let's go ahead and return now to the interview with Carter. Yeah, but it was kind of fun because not too long into the book, Penny goes to a mall,
Yeah,
and that's what we did, right? We she doesn't go to hang out, but she's at a mall, and there was a Walden Books, and there was there
right.
were these places, and I was having fond memories of
Like
being a
Camelot
teenager, and
music and
the closest mall was 2 hours away growing up, so it's not like I got to hang out
okay.
there often, but that was a thing, was hanging out in malls,
Well, I
and I
definitely
would.
got carried away in that scene. Like I ended up cutting probably about 20 pages of the mall scene because I'm like, this is ridiculous.
Right.
But I had so much fun writing it and researching, looking at all the old photos of malls and having my own visceral memories. But
Yeah.
then after a while, I'm like, okay, this is just me having fun, and it's not really serving the story.
Right. Yeah, I can imagine. Um, and I just completely lost my train of thought, what I was thinking about in terms of, oh, we have spoken before about that you like to put your characters into into just you're just mean to your characters sometimes, but you really did Penny dirty this time with her name.
Yeah. Yeah.
um
Well, the inspiration for Penny's name was Nellie Bly, who was a really famous person back in, geez, man, I'm going to forget now, but I believe the 20s. And she took it upon herself to um, circumnavigate the globe on her own to see if she could do it in 88 days. And she did. And
yeah.
so she was a real pioneer, and I just thought of this idea of this person who is just striking out to face the unknown. I just felt like it was a nice little tribute.
Yeah. um that's a nicer version of her name. um Talk a little bit more about Penny. She is very sheltered. She's not street smart, but she is incredibly brilliant. What about her is going to resonate with readers?
Yeah, I think just her vulnerability, because you see someone like Penny, and she's not autistic. And many people who have savantism were born with it and are on the autism spectrum. And Penny required her savantism through physical trauma, but she certainly evidences a lot of the characteristics of maybe what we would traditionally think of as an autistic person, in terms of a real inability to make eye contact, really saying what's exactly on your mind, not really having a lot of necessarily social graces. So she's got this fairly cold exterior, and she's brilliant, but she's fearful, and she doesn't know what's waiting for her. And she has such a pronounced fear of abandonment that it just propels her to go look for her father. So she's just, I mean, when you really look at her, she's a little girl. She's a little girl who wants her dad. And I think readers might resonate with just that kind of going underneath all those exterior layers and getting to her heart, which is huge. And she just wants to be loved. And so I really enjoyed kind of fleshing her out as she became more and more vibrant and aware, in my mind, to do that for the readers as well.
Yeah. Yeah, and you really, because I think of some of the because of those vulnerabilities, you want to root for her, but at the same time, even beyond being a thriller, it's nerve-wracking to watch her go out into the world. Even
Right.
before
Yeah.
everything starts happening, you're like, please don't, please stop talking to that stranger that you don't know, that you're putting yourself in this situation with.
Right. And as you dive into the 80s, which is also great for a thriller writer, is the lack of technology, and just knowing
Yes.
that if you are driving in the middle of nowhere, you are in the middle of nowhere. And unless you can find a payphone or somebody who might be friendly to help you, you are potentially really out of luck. And so that was great for me to be able to like kind of have introduce those levels of fear, because that's what it was like.
Yeah.
You went to go meet a friend, and if your friend didn't show up, there was no way of contacting them unless you
Yep.
could find a payphone or somebody's phone somewhere. So I have very pronounced memories of that happening for me, and so it was fun to relive, kind of from a safe distance.
Yeah, and she's on this road trip, and I'm just still, that just made me think, we don't have GPS, we don't have, it's just not a map on your phone. You have to actually get the map and either pull over, or what you shouldn't be doing
Right.
is what I did, was drive with the map on your steering wheel while you're
Right,
trying
right.
to.
But in Penny's instance, however, she could get that Thomas Brothers map and study it and memorize it
Right.
because she
Yeah.
has a photographic memory. So that's at least one ability that kind of came into play in a positive way for her.
Yes. And as you were speaking about, if your friend wasn't there, you had no way of getting hold of them. It made me just remember about the mall, the mall that we would visit in my my home state. It was, we're going to meet at this time at the clock. There was a main clock in that mall, and
Right,
I hadn't thought about that in years. But we're going to meet at
right,
noon at
right.
the
You have to
clock.
give a landmark, right?
Yes,
Totally.
a very different time. Um, I would assume that you probably did research for savantism, some of Penny's special abilities. What other types of research did you do for this book in particular?
Yeah, I wanted to I did, when I was thinking about Penny and knowing that she was a savant, it wasn't as I didn't want her necessarily to have been born with savantism. So I researched, can you actually acquire savantism, savant syndrome through a blow to the head, basically? And the answer is yes, and it's exceptionally rare. That's why in the 80s, in Penny's time, she was one of 75 in the world who had her specific flavor of savantism. Um, so that became interesting to me. And in deciding what abilities she had, there's a smorgasbord of exceptional abilities exhibited by people with savantism. And, I definitely wanted her to have a photographic memory and eidetic memory. I wanted she sees numbers as colors. So if you say the number 3, she might see yellow in her mind. And she has an exceptional ability to draw with a photorealistic ability. So I wanted her to have these abilities that were exceptional, but not necessarily useful.
Mm-hmm.
That was important to me. She wasn't a Sherlock Holmes who could deduce everything happening and have these levels of logic that surpassed everybody else. And in fact, she's not even great at math. And so she's lived her whole life believing that because she's being studied, she lives in an institute that basically schools her and kind of studies her mind. So she's always been the center of attention, and I just love the duality of, like, okay, what happens when you literally just walk out your door and you have nothing to rely on but yourself? How do those abilities come into play? So I researched that as much as I could. There's not a ton of research on acquired savant syndrome, as it's called.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but so I certainly probably took some license with it. But it was really intriguing to go down that path and write about it.
Yeah. Um, you got the idea of Penny. She kept bothering you until you wrote about her. How much did her character change from that first initial idea to the end of the book? Was that a lot, or did she kind of come to you really well fleshed out?
Yeah, she was pretty well fleshed out. What's interesting about the writing process is, characters, how much a character changes is totally your own perception of it. And, the entire book is your own perception of that book. So I wrote this book, and I went through an interesting process with it, because I almost always write first person present tense, meaning, I go to the store. And they would be
Mm-hmm.
written like that. So it's you're behind this person's eyes, and everything is immediate. And you really get intimate with this person. You really get to know them because you're so close to them. And I started out with this book, and I'm like, I don't know. I don't know. She's so different than me. I don't know if I can write this first person present. So I wrote the entire manuscript third person past tense, meaning Penny went to the store. And her character didn't necessarily change, I had her it pretty fleshed out in my mind, to your point. But when my editor read the book, my editor's like, I cannot connect with this person at all.
Mm,
And I realized I made a big mistake because she's already hard to connect to because of how she speaks and how she acts. It's hard to get inside her mind. And I made her even more distant by writing third person past tense. So I told my editor, I mean, there was a lot of other issues with the manuscript that, scenes and things like that. And I fixed them all. Um, so I told my editor, I'm like, why don't I rewrite the first 20 pages, first person present? And I sent those to her and she read them and she's like, oh, there's Penny. There she is. And her voice came out. And then I'm like, damn, now I got to rewrite this entire. So I rewrote the entire manual. It took me 4 months. It was a really profound exercise to go through because you realize as you're doing it, you're not just changing from Penny went to the store to I go to the store. And even if that's all you were changing, that's still a lot of work. You realize the voice completely changes as you
yes.
get into that really intimate point of view. So I ended up rewriting my manuscript, but I might as well just had it to the side and started with a blank sheet of paper because it was such a gutting of every word in the manuscript. Which is why it took so long, but it was for the best. So I don't think my idea of Penny changed. I think how I presented her ultimately changed massively during very, very difficult rewriting process.
Yeah. Wow. But once you said that, I was like, oh my gosh, I personally would have had a moment of, but I don't want to write this whole thing over again.
Right. But that's the beautiful thing about writing. And I say this over and over again is that you can't, if you do have that passion for it and it is so meaningful to you to tell your story in a way that you want to and in a way that actually resonates also with readers, is you will do that work. And it's hard. But it's also like you try to find, what am I learning through this rewrite? And so it was good for me ultimately. And I learned not to second guess myself. I learned to I'm good at writing first person present tense.
Yeah.
I should, if the story dictates that that's a good way to do it, I should do that because I think I have a lot of empathy and I think I can crawl inside somebody's head, even if they're very different than me. And I shouldn't have second guessed myself.
Yeah. Thinking about rewriting an entire book, going from third person to first person, and as I said in the interview, my first instinct would just be sheer stomach dropping. No, but yeah, often after I sometimes I need to wallow a little bit in things like that, just wallow in the no, I don't want to moment. But then you come back and you start doing the thing that you maybe didn't want to do, and it can be a powerful exercise to redo something like that. And I can only imagine that you would learn a lot and learn, well, some things might not go as well as they did the first time, but some things might go even better. So it's an experience. But we're going to take our final break of this episode. When we come back, Carter writes thrillers. So where does he come up with some of the more intense situations that his characters find themselves in? Stay tuned. You are listening to and or watching the GSMC Book Review Podcast, and I will be right back.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
Welcome back to the GSMC Book Review Podcast. I am speaking today, again, as you know, with Carter Wilson. We are talking about his new standalone thriller, The Father She Went to Find. Before the break, we were talking about rewriting the entire book from third person to first person, and what a powerful exercise that was. Let's go ahead now and return to the interview for the conclusion of this conversation. Thrillers are always a little tricky to talk about because you don't want to give really anything away.
Right.
On the surface of the book, it's a story of a young woman who is going to find her father, but of course, it's never that easy. And again, we
Right.
don't want to give too much away about what happens during this process. But for you as a writer who writes thrillers, do you just have a Rolodex in your brain of crazy things that can happen to your characters? Or do they
Yeah.
come to you as you're writing? How does that process work for you?
Yeah, they come as I'm writing. I mean, it was an interesting story because, in talking with my agent, my editor, and knowing that it was my pandemic story and which was maybe kind of leaning towards being a little bit lighter than what I normally write, because we were all just kind of yearning for
Mm-hmm.
happier things and happier times back in 2020 and 2021. Um, but you start writing, and especially if you're not outlining, and you realize like she's going to meet some people that are going to be great, and she's going to meet some people who are absolutely not going to be great.
Yeah.
And as I write, I'm always looking for conflict. I'm interested in conflict. I think it was what propels thrillers. I'm not trying to be cliched about it, and I'm not trying to, introduce tropes, but I'm realizing that, the reality of it is there's a lot of people with horrible intentions out there that are only looking for that opportunity. And this young woman out on her own with no street smarts presents an opportunity to a lot of evil people.
Yeah.
So it's almost like it's unavoidable that
Right.
some tough things happen to her. So I see things very cinematically when I'm writing. So I'm pitching her in the room, and I'm like, what would I do next? What would she do next? And, I like the idea that she just looks out the motel room window, and what does she see out there? And to me, it's never a puppy. To
Right.
me, it's like there's a dude out there staring through the window or whatever, because that's just
Mhm.
interesting to me. It's like, now, because I love the idea of like, now what are you going to do? Because I get to live through that moment, and I get to explore what I would do. Were I in this person's shoes. So it's and some things you delete and some things you add. Um, but the more organic it is to me, the more rewarding it is, and hopefully more rewarding for the readers, because then it's a little bit more unexpected.
Well, and I mean, it's a thriller, so obviously things are going to happen, but
Mhm.
also in some respects, it would be less believable if nothing happened to her on this trip
Right,
because she really does have no experience. So she's going to encounter someone that's going to, like you said, take advantage of her naivete.
right, right. And it was interesting to me to have some of those things happen where all of her abilities meant nothing.
Right.
Um, and so it's almost like this shock to like, I've never been unable to navigate myself out of a bad situation before. Of course, her knowledge of a bad situation was completely different growing up in this institute. But then it was important to me that over time, she was able to adjust and be able to like, okay, my abilities might not directly diffuse the situation, but indirectly I can do things that nobody else can that might lead me out of this. That she was learning to acquire those street smarts by using her natural abilities.
Yeah. You mentioned your next book comes out in January. Do you want to give a quick preview of that?
Yeah. So when I was wrapping up Father She Went to Find, after all those edits and feeling like I had really, I had spent a long time on this book. I was ready to just write this straightforward, in your face thriller. And the idea for it came to me after talking with a friend who had listened to a podcast, and he told me I had to listen to it. So he told me the idea of this podcast, and I'm like, I am never going to listen to that, because I'm going to take that general concept, twist it a little bit, and then make it my own story. So it's modern day, tells the story of Poe Webb, a 30-year-old podcaster. She's actually has one of the top true crime podcasts in the country. And the conceit of the podcast is that it's pre-recorded, but basically her guests confess some kind of crime to her. And if she believes them, they have a conversation, and then that becomes the episode. So people call in, and they're anonymous, and they're able to talk about some really hardcore stuff, and it's become this hit show. And then one day she has a guest who says, "I killed your mother."
Oh,
Uh, and nobody knows that Poe's mother's dead except for Poe. And Poe actually witnessed her mother being murdered when she was 13 years old. But she knows this person can't be the killer because she ended up stalking that person down and killing them. So what she doesn't know is who this person is, how they know her mother's dead, and how to defuse this person who then ends up starting to stalk her very publicly on her show.
yikes.
So
Okay. Yeah.
it's intense. I love it. I'm so excited for it. I actually have, as I was writing this, I was envisioning it so deeply that I actually hired an actress to do a couple scenes for me from the book.
Hmm.
Because there's parts in the book where she just films herself with her iPhone. And so I wanted to see what that looked like. So there's actual QR codes in the book where you can see her, and you can see her,
Interesting.
yeah, in those scenes that you just read. So it was, oh my God, it was so much fun to write and create. I really had a blast with it.
Nice. See, you're not getting that in 1987 Walden books.
No, absolutely not. They would not have known what a QR code was in
No.
1987. Barcode, yes. QR code, no.
Right, right. Do you ever because you're talking about the book that you wrote in 2020 that's out now and you're promoting this one's out in January. I'm sure you're writing something else now. Do you ever get confused as to what you're talking about?
Rarely. So I never write more than one thing at a time. But what happens is you'll get knee deep. You end up hating a book by the time you finish it because you've been so close to it and you have no perspective for it. You hope it sells. So then you get into the love phase with something new. You're maybe 30% in, and that's when your edits come in from that last book. So you got to drop everything, go to that last book, and then spend, potentially 1 to 4 months doing edits from your editor. But I never juggle. I'm always like, I'm very good about fixing my head. Okay, this is the story. What I struggle what I struggle with is remembering old books. Like people will tell me like, "Oh, I love this one character," and I'm like, "I don't even know who you're talking about. I don't remember that person." But it's weird because I simply don't remember a lot of my stories,
Right.
or at
Wow.
least the nuances of them.
Sure, sure. I mean, yeah, everything kind of gets pushed out as you're writing
Right,
new
because I never
things.
go back and read my old stuff or listen to it or anything. So I'm like, "Oh yeah, I kind of remember that."
Yeah, interesting. You mentioned your newest character coming out in January as a podcast host. You also now have a podcast, I think, since the last time we spoke. Do you want to talk about the podcast at all?
Yeah, I launched it. That's a good question. 2022, maybe. Um, I, yeah, I just love writers. I love talking to writers, and I wanted to have a conversation series that was completely unscripted. I had no questions planned. Of course, I knew who the writer was that I would be interviewing, but I didn't want to talk about their latest book. I wanted to just talk about their journey as a human and as a writer. So it's called Making It Up, and probably 45 minutes to an hour episodes. And at the end of every episode, one of the reasons it's called Making It Up, aside from the fact that I have no questions prepared, is we make up a story at the end. I pick
Hmm.
a random book from my bookshelf. They pick a page number. I pick a sentence. I read that sentence. And then they give me the next couple sentences of what happens. Then we just go back and forth for about 3 to 5 minutes, just making up this crazy story. So it's totally improv. We have to accept each other's premise every time we speak. And I've done it with science writers, with New York Times bestselling fiction writers, just the whole gamut. And it's nerve-wracking, and it's always a lot of fun.
I bet. Who was your most recent guest?
I just had on, actually, I had on Tim Booth, who is he's the lead singer of a band, James, which is actually my favorite band. They've been touring for 40 years. Their new album just hit #1 in the UK, which has never
Hmm.
happened before. But he wrote a novel, and I've gotten to know him because I use some of their lyrics in my books from time to time. So I got to know him by asking permission. So I just interviewed him, and that was kind of a dream come true.
Yeah, fun. Very fun. And what have you been reading lately?
Oh, that's a good question. I've been reading books for blurbs. I usually don't read a lot of what I write. I usually don't read a lot of fiction. I mostly read nonfiction. So I will say that the best thing I read recently that was nonfiction, which doesn't sound like it, but it's awesome. I totally forget the guy's name who wrote it and even the title. I think it's maybe like The Mysterious Case of Rudolf Diesel, about Rudolf Diesel, who invented the diesel engine. And he died under very mysterious circumstances, but it was his. You had no idea. This is what I love about it. You had no idea how big this guy was, like how important this diesel engine was to shaping the world pre-World War One, and how it exists today. So when you think of diesel fuel, that should be capitalized. I'm like, I didn't know that. Diesel
Yeah.
somebody's name. So
Yeah.
I don't know. I love that stuff. I'll read, stuff like that. Anything Eric Larson writes. I love all those because I like to learn. I'm like, it's a great story, and I just learned something.
Yeah. Quick sidebar, our current car in Europe is diesel, but the words in Portuguese for regular gas and diesel are gasoline and gasolina. So I was completely paranoid when I first moved here that I was going to put the wrong gas in my car.
Right. I mean, it's crazy. Like diesel fuel isn't even flammable. You could drop a match into a tank of diesel fuel, and nothing would happen. I mean, it's really like environmentally safe. I didn't know any of this stuff. I'm just like, I think trucks take diesel fuel. That's all I knew, and some Volkswagens.
Yeah, interesting.
But
now I'm learning
powered
about
the world's economy back then.
Yeah. People want to know more about you and your books. If you could share the usual things of website and any social media that you're active on.
Yeah, absolutely. Books, newsletter, appearances, all that good stuff is at carterwilson.com. Most social media, I'm just Carter Wilson author, and my writing company, again, which does writing retreats and one-on-one coaching and online classes, is all at unboundwriter.com.
Okay, thank you. Carter, is there anything that we did not talk about that you wanted to make sure you brought up, especially about the father she went to find?
I just hope people enjoy it. It's a different story for me, and Penny holds a place in my heart for sure. So I hope people read it and enjoy it.
All right. Well, thank you so much. I always enjoy when you come on the podcast. So thank you so much for taking the time out of your weekend to talk to me. I appreciate it.
Thank you, and enjoy Portugal.
Thank you once again to Carter for joining me for his third time on the podcast. I enjoy speaking with him whenever he is here. And I do want a quick sidebar because in my random story about diesel and living in Europe, I said gasoline and gasolina, which is wrong. Gasoleo and gasolina. Don't know where my brain was, but still, I was always completely paranoid about that. Still am to a certain extent, but I'm more comfortable now. But at any rate, thank you once again to Carter for joining me for this episode. It's like I said, his third time on the podcast, and I enjoy speaking to him whenever he is here. If you are a fan of thrillers, especially standalone thrillers, and you're looking for something that's not part of a series that you can read. Sorry, my dog is distracting me back there. She wants to go in that room very much. But if you are a fan of thrillers, then you should definitely check out this book, but also any of Carter's other books. But this one's set in the 80s. I really like the main character, who has some very compelling qualities about her, different from some of the other thrillers that I have read and main characters. So Penny is definitely a character that you would want to get to know. So check out this book, The Father She Went to Find, as well as any of Carter's other thrillers. As we are wrapping up, I hope you will join me for next week's episode when I will be speaking with Stacey Stokes. We'll be talking about her book, The Darkness Rises. Again, we have a bit of a thriller. This one, your one sentence pitch is a gripping speculative thriller perfect for fans of Lauren Oliver and Ginny Myers' Sane, about one girl with the power to see death before it happens, and the terrible consequences she faces when saving someone goes wrong. So there's your teaser for next week's episode. I hope you will join me for that. In the meantime, if you are a fan of this podcast, please do like, follow, subscribe on whatever platform you are watching or listening to the podcast on. Also, leaving a positive review really does help out the podcast, gets that algorithm going, and gets this podcast out to more people, book lovers such as yourselves. You can also follow the podcast on social media, Facebook, Twitter, or X, Instagram, and TikTok. I love hearing from you, so come find the podcast and me on social media. Hope you're having a great week. I hope you're not standing in a hallway waiting for somebody to open the door to let you in. Hope you're having a great week, but whatever you're doing this week, I hope that it gives you plenty of time to get yourself lost in a good book. Thank you so much.
Let's go. I wake up to a little bit of drool on my pillow, feel like it's gonna be a bad day. Yeah, I'm tired of shit, and the coffee ain't hit yet, damn, ain't that great. I don't wanna go to